While my son Marcus and his wife Stephanie were standing outside the locked gates of what they thought was still their $3.2 million lakefront estate, holding eviction notices and stammering excuses to the sheriff's deputy who was explaining that they had exactly 48 hours to remove their belongings. I was sitting in my newly renovated home office reviewing the property transfer documents that had just made me the sole legal owner of the mansion I'd purchased, renovated, and maintained for the past 15 years, finally understanding that sometimes the family members who change the locks to keep a 70-year-old woman out of her own home are about to discover they just locked out someone with 43 years of real estate law expertise and access to legal resources they never knew existed. Tell me in the comments, have you ever been betrayed by family members who thought they could manipulate or control you, only to discover you had more power than they ever imagined? Share your story below, because today you're going to learn that sometimes the people who try to make you homeless in your own house are about to receive the most expensive lesson in property law they'll ever get. This story is about the September morning when I realized that my own son, the child I'd raised alone after his father abandoned us when Marcus was only 8 years old, put through law school with money I'd earned building my real estate practice from a single-woman startup to one of Seattle's most respected boutique firms, supported through his early career struggles when he couldn't find work at major law firms, and trusted with joint ownership of the family estate that represented my life's work and primary financial security, had been systematically planning to force me out of my own home while assuming I was too old, too trusting, and too legally naive to protect myself against his calculated manipulation. When I discovered that the son I'd sacrificed everything for, taught everything I knew about property law and real estate transactions during countless evenings of homework help and career mentoring, entrusted with my most valuable assets during what I'd believed were collaborative estate planning sessions, had been quietly consulting with elder law attorneys about the legal procedures for having me declared mentally incompetent, while coordinating with his wife to gain complete control of my property and assets, with the ultimate goal of forcing me into assisted living against my will so they could sell my lakefront mansion and pocket the proceeds. My name is Margaret Elizabeth Thornton, and at 70 years old, I thought I'd found the perfect solution for maintaining family unity while ensuring proper estate planning by adding my son Marcus as joint owner of the spectacular 8,500 square foot Tudor mansion on Lake Washington that I'd worked 4 decades to purchase, renovate, and transform into one of Seattle's most valuable residential properties. For 3 years, this joint ownership arrangement had seemed like a reasonable way for a successful real estate attorney to plan for the future, while keeping the family property under family control and maintaining close relationships with my 2 grandchildren, 12-year-old Emma and 10-year-old James. The lakefront estate that everyone in Seattle's legal and business communities knew as my crowning professional achievement had actually been purchased in 2009 as a foreclosure property. During the real estate market collapse, transformed through my legal expertise and architectural vision into a showplace that had been featured in Seattle Magazine and Pacific Northwest Homes, and maintained through careful financial planning and property management that had required both extensive legal knowledge and sophisticated business acumen that most people never develop even after decades in the real estate industry. What I hadn't expected was that my son Marcus and his wife Stephanie would view my generous decision to add Marcus as joint owner not as a thoughtful estate planning gesture that demonstrated trust and family unity, but as a strategic opportunity to gradually assume complete control of my most valuable asset while systematically undermining my independence and autonomy in preparation for what they apparently believed would be an easy transition to seizing total control of my financial affairs and personal living arrangements. The Tudor Mansion's location in Madison Park, one of Seattle's most prestigious and exclusive neighborhoods, had made it not just a spectacular family home, but also a significant investment property that had appreciated steadily over the 15 years since I'd purchased it as a foreclosure, bargain, and transformed it through extensive renovation and restoration work that had required both legal expertise in managing contractors and permits, as well as sophisticated aesthetic judgment in creating a home that would serve as both family legacy and long-term financial security. My decision to purchase the property had been made during the 2008-2009 financial crisis, when my experience in real estate law had enabled me to recognize distressed property opportunities that other potential buyers either couldn't identify or lacked the legal knowledge and financial resources to pursue successfully through the complex foreclosure acquisition process. The original owners, Robert and Patricia Wellington, had been prominent Seattle real estate developers who'd built the Tudor Mansion in 1987 as their family estate, investing over $4.2 million in construction and landscaping that had created one of the most architecturally impressive and beautifully appointed properties on Lake Washington's coveted Eastern Shore. The mansion had been designed by Harrison & Associates, Seattle's premier luxury residential architecture firm, and constructed by Wellington's own development company, using the finest materials and most skilled craftspeople available in the Pacific Northwest during the peak of 1980s luxury home construction. The property featured classic Tudor Revival architecture with limestone and handmade brick exteriors, diamond pane-leaded glass windows imported from England, slate roofing that had been quarried in Wales, and the kind of detailed stonework and decorative elements that had required master craftspeople and had become prohibitively expensive to replicate in contemporary luxury construction projects. The architectural details had included hand-carved limestone trim around windows and doorways, decorative half-timbering with authentic English oak, and copper gutters and downspouts that had developed the perfect green patina over decades of exposure to Seattle's marine climate. The main level of the mansion had been designed for both family living and elegant entertaining, featuring a grand foyer with imported marble flooring and a sweeping staircase with hand-forged iron railings, formal living and dining rooms with 16-foot coffered ceilings and massive stone fireplaces, a wood-paneled library with floor-to-ceiling mahogany bookcases and rolling ladders, and a gourmet kitchen that had been completely modernized in 2005 with commercial-grade Sub-Zero and Wolf appliances, custom cabinetry, and granite countertops that had been quarried specifically for the project. The second floor had housed 6 bedrooms and 4 full bathrooms, including a master suite that had occupied the entire west wing with panoramic views of Lake Washington and the Cascade Mountains beyond. The master bedroom had featured a sitting area with its own fireplace and French doors opening to a private balcony, while the master bathroom had been appointed with Carrara marble throughout, a soaking tub positioned to capture lake views, a separate glass-enclosed shower with multiple shower heads, and dual vanities with custom cabinetry and period-appropriate fixtures. Each of the additional bedrooms had been designed with attention to detail that had reflected the overall quality of the mansion's construction, featuring original hardwood floors that had been installed in intricate parquet patterns, decorative crown molding and wainscoting, built-in window seats and storage, and windows that had provided abundant natural light while maintaining the privacy that had been essential in such an exclusive neighborhood. The mansion's outdoor spaces had been equally impressive, featuring professionally designed and maintained gardens that had included formal rose gardens, perennial borders, specimen trees, and seasonal plantings that had provided year-round beauty and had required ongoing maintenance by skilled landscaping professionals. The property had also included a swimming pool and spa that had been designed to complement the Tudor architecture, a regulation-sized tennis court with professional lighting for evening play, and extensive patios and terraces that had provided multiple areas for outdoor entertaining and relaxation. But perhaps the most valuable feature of the property had been its 200 feet of private Lake Washington waterfront, including a deep-water dock that could accommodate boats up to 60 feet in length, a boathouse with storage for water sports equipment, and a private beach area that had been maintained with imported sand and had provided swimming and recreational opportunities that were rare. When the Wellington family had been forced into bankruptcy due to the collapse of their real estate development business during the 2008 financial crisis, the property had entered foreclosure proceedings that had created an opportunity for knowledgeable, Investors who understood both the real estate market and the legal procedures necessary for acquiring distressed properties at below-market prices. My successful bid of $1.8 million for the foreclosure property had represented both a calculated investment opportunity based on my professional understanding of Seattle real estate values and the fulfillment of a lifelong dream to own waterfront property that would serve as both family legacy and financial security for my retirement years. The purchase price had been approximately 60% below the property's pre-crisis appraised value, creating immediate equity that had made the investment both financially sound and personally satisfying. The renovation and restoration process that had followed the purchase had required 18 months of intensive work and an additional $850,000 investment in updating mechanical systems, restoring original architectural details, modernizing technology and security systems, and making improvements that had enhanced both the property's livability and its long-term investment value. My legal expertise had been essential throughout the renovation process, enabling me to manage contractor relationships, navigate permit requirements, resolve zoning and environmental compliance issues, and ensure that all work had been completed to the highest standards while protecting my financial interests through proper contracts and project management oversight. The renovation had included complete updating of electrical systems to handle contemporary technology and security requirements, installation of new heating and cooling systems that had provided both comfort and energy efficiency, restoration of original hardwood floors and architectural millwork, updating of all bathrooms and the kitchen while maintaining period-appropriate aesthetics, and installation of comprehensive security and home automation systems that had provided both convenience and protection. By 2011, the completely renovated mansion had been appraised at $3.9 million, representing a successful investment that had provided immediate equity while creating a spectacular family home that had served as both personal residence and professional symbol of my success in the real estate law field. The property had continued to appreciate over the following decade, reaching an estimated value of $4.8 million by 2021, making it not only a beautiful family home, but also a significant financial asset that had represented the majority of my accumulated wealth and had provided the foundation for my retirement, security, and estate planning objectives. My decision to add Marcus as joint owner in 2021 had been motivated by several practical and emotional considerations. I'd wanted to simplify eventual property transfer and avoid probate complications that could have created legal challenges and tax burdens for my family after my death. I'd believed that joint ownership would provide Marcus with legal authority to assist with property management as I aged, and I'd thought that including Marcus on the deed would demonstrate family unity and ensure that the property would remain under family control for future generations. "Mom, this is such an incredibly generous gesture," Marcus had said when I'd first proposed adding him to the deed during a family dinner at the mansion in March 2021. "Having joint ownership will make everything so much simpler for estate planning purposes, and it gives me the legal standing to help you manage the property if you ever need assistance with maintenance decisions or financial planning as you get older." Marcus's enthusiastic response to the joint ownership proposal had seemed both genuine and professionally appropriate, given his background as an attorney and his understanding of estate planning principles. His law degree from the University of Washington and his experience in corporate law had made him seem like the logical family member to entrust with such important financial and legal responsibilities. "I really appreciate your confidence in me, Mom," Marcus had continued during that dinner conversation. "I know how much this property means to you, both financially and emotionally, and I promise I'll always respect your wishes and make sure that any decisions about the property reflect your values and priorities." Stephanie had also expressed appreciation for my decision to include Marcus in the property ownership, emphasizing her understanding of the trust and responsibility that the arrangement represented. "Margaret, this is such a thoughtful way to handle estate planning," Stephanie had said, using the formal tone that had characterized our relationship since her marriage to Marcus 5 years earlier. Marcus and I understand what a significant gesture this is, and we want you to know that we'll always consider this your home and respect your authority over any decisions about the property. The joint ownership arrangement had been formalized through a quitclaim deed that had been prepared by my longtime attorney and estate planning specialist, Patricia Harrison, who had reviewed all the legal implications and had ensured that the property transfer would achieve my objectives while protecting my interests and maintaining appropriate legal protections. Margaret, this joint ownership structure will accomplish your estate planning goals while maintaining your control over the property during your lifetime, Patricia had explained during our consultation. As joint tenants with right of survivorship, you'll both have equal legal rights to the property, but practically speaking, since you'll continue to live there and manage it, the arrangement shouldn't change your day-to-day control or decision-making. Authority. The property transfer had been completed in April 2021, and for the first year, the arrangement had seemed to work exactly as I'd intended. Marcus had been respectful of my continued authority over property decisions, had consulted with me before making any suggestions about maintenance or improvements, and had seemed genuinely grateful for the trust and responsibility that joint ownership had represented. During this period, Marcus and Stephanie had continued to treat the mansion as my home, visiting regularly with their children, but always respecting my role as the primary resident and decision-maker. Family gatherings had remained pleasant and collaborative, with Marcus occasionally offering to help with property management tasks, but never overstepping boundaries or challenging my authority over day-to-day decisions. The grandchildren, Emma and James, had continued to enjoy spending time at the mansion, swimming in the pool during summer visits, helping with garden projects, and participating in family traditions that had made the property feel like a true multi-generational family legacy that would continue to bring the family together for decades to come. But during the summer of 2022, I'd begun to notice subtle changes in Marcus and Stephanie's attitude toward the property and their perception of their role in its management and future planning. These changes had initially seemed minor and had been easy to rationalize as natural evolution in our family dynamics as I aged and as they became more comfortable with their legal status as joint owners. The first indication that something fundamental had shifted had occurred during a family barbecue in July 2022, when Marcus had made several suggestions about property modifications that had surprised me with their presumptuous tone and their implication that he had equal authority over major decisions about the house and grounds. "Mom, Stephanie and I have been thinking that the tennis court is really underutilized," Marcus had said during our outdoor dinner. "We're wondering if it might make sense to convert that space into additional parking or maybe even a guest house. That could provide rental income or accommodate visitors more comfortably." The suggestion itself hadn't been unreasonable, but Marcus's presentation had implied that the decision was open for family discussion rather than ultimately my choice as the primary resident and the person who had purchased and maintained the property for over a decade. His tone had suggested that he viewed himself as having co-equal authority over major property decisions, rather than serving in an advisory role that respected my continued ownership and control. "I think we should get some estimates for what a conversion project like that would cost," Stephanie had added, reinforcing the impression that they considered themselves to be active decision-makers rather than respectful family members offering suggestions for my consideration. My response had been diplomatically non-committal, as I'd wanted to avoid family conflict while also making clear that I wasn't ready to make such significant changes to the property that had served my needs perfectly for over a decade and represented both my primary residence and my most important financial asset. "That's an interesting idea," I'd replied. "But I've always enjoyed having the tennis court available, and I'm not sure I'm ready to make such a major change to the property right now. Maybe we can revisit the idea in the future if my needs or circumstances change." But Marcus's reaction to my response had been the first clear indication that he and Stephanie had developed expectations about their role in property decisions. that went far beyond what I'd intended when I'd added him to the deed. Mom, I think you should consider that this property requires significant ongoing maintenance, and that making strategic improvements could enhance its value and reduce long-term costs, Marcus had said, using a tone that had suggested he viewed my reluctance as evidence of poor judgment rather than legitimate personal preference. This conversation had been followed by several similar discussions over the following months, in which Marcus and Stephanie had repeatedly suggested modifications, improvements, and changes to property management that had seemed designed more to establish their authority over decision-making than to actually improve the property or serve my needs as the primary resident. By early 2023, these conversations had escalated to include suggestions about my personal living arrangements and my capacity to continue managing such a large property independently. Discussions that had begun to make me uncomfortable and had started to feel more like interventions than family consultations. Mom, we're concerned that this house is getting to be too much for you to handle, Stephanie had said during a particularly memorable family dinner in February 2023. The maintenance requirements are enormous, and we worry about your safety and comfort in such a large space as you get older. The implication that I was becoming incapable of managing my own home had been both insulting and alarming, particularly given that I'd been successfully maintaining the property for over a decade and had never expressed any concerns about my ability to continue doing so with appropriate professional help for maintenance and landscaping. I appreciate your concern, I'd replied, but I'm very comfortable here, and I have excellent relationships with contractors and service providers who help me maintain everything properly. I'm not ready to make any changes to my living situation, but Marcus had been prepared with what had appeared to be carefully researched arguments about the challenges of aging in place and the benefits of transitioning to more manageable living arrangements before problems developed. Mom, we've been researching some really excellent senior living communities that would provide you with maintenance-free living, social activities, and on-site healthcare support, Marcus had said, producing brochures that he'd apparently collected in advance of the conversation. Some of these places are really luxurious and would allow you to enjoy your retirement without worrying about property management and upkeep. The suggestion that I should consider moving to a senior living facility had been shocking, both for its presumption and for its complete disregard for my repeatedly expressed satisfaction with my current living arrangements and my clear statements that I intended to remain in my home for as long as my health and finances allowed. Standing in my home office that September morning, surrounded by law books and case files that represented 4 decades of real estate law expertise, looking out at the lake views that had provided daily inspiration and satisfaction for over a decade, I had no idea that the family members I'd been trusting with my most valuable assets were about to reveal the true scope of their plans during a confrontation that would change everything forever and demonstrate exactly what happened when people assumed they could manipulate someone. With my legal knowledge, professional relationships, and determination to protect what I'd worked my entire life to build. Sometimes the people who think you're just a vulnerable elderly woman whose decision-making capacity is declining with age are about to discover you're actually someone with the legal expertise and strategic thinking necessary to outmaneuver them completely while teaching them the most expensive lesson about underestimating someone's capabilities they'll ever receive. Marcus and Stephanie were about to learn that changing the locks on someone's house was the beginning of the most comprehensive legal response they'd ever encountered, and the most costly mistake they'd ever make in their personal, professional, and financial lives. Standing in my home office that September morning, reviewing the family photographs and legal achievement awards that lined my mahogany bookshelves, I couldn't help but reflect on how drastically different Marcus's attitude toward my legal expertise had been just 20 years earlier, when he'd been a struggling law student, desperate for the kind of professional guidance and industry connections that only someone with my experience and reputation in Seattle's legal community could provide. It was a relationship that had been built on genuine respect for my capabilities and sincere gratitude for the sacrifices I'd made to ensure his success. a time when Marcus had spoken with such enthusiasm about learning from my expertise and building a legal career that would honor the professional standards and innovative approaches that had defined my 4 decades in real estate law. But to understand how I'd reached this point of casual dismissal from family members who should have been celebrating my continued success and professional acumen, rather than treating my legal judgment as evidence of declining mental capacity, you need to know about the life of legal innovation and real estate mastery I'd built before Marcus and Stephanie decided my expertise was something outdated rather than invaluable. A life of groundbreaking legal work, industry leadership, and the kind of strategic thinking that had made their systematic underestimation both possible and ultimately catastrophic for their own interests. My journey to that frustrating September morning had begun 70 years earlier, when I'd been born Margaret Elizabeth Richardson to parents who understood that a woman's education and professional competence were not optional luxuries, but essential foundations for survival and dignity in a world that rarely offered women second chances or easy paths to legal recognition and financial independence, particularly in the male-dominated field of real estate law that would become my specialty and passion. My father, Dr. James Richardson, had been a professor of economics at the University of Washington, specializing in real estate markets and property valuation theory that had helped shape Washington state's approach to property taxation, zoning regulations, and development planning throughout the mid-20th century. He'd spent his career analyzing complex market systems, teaching graduate students about property economics, and consulting with government agencies on policies that had influenced millions of dollars in real estate transactions and development projects throughout the Pacific Northwest. "Margaret," my father had said during one of our regular Sunday evening conversations about my future plans, "the most important thing you can learn is that real estate law is fundamentally about understanding how property rights, market forces, and human behavior intersect to create wealth or destroy it. Anyone can memorize legal statutes, but it takes real expertise to understand how those laws actually function in practice to protect or undermine people's financial security and dreams." My mother, Dr. Helen Richardson, had been equally influential in shaping my understanding of what was possible for an educated woman willing to work harder and think more strategically than the people around her. She'd worked as a research economist for Washington State's Department of Commerce, analyzing housing markets and development trends, while also managing our household with the kind of meticulous attention to detail and analytical thinking that had kept our family's finances both stable and growing despite the economic uncertainties that had characterized the 1950s and 1960s. "Darling," my mother had told me during my high school years, "never let anyone convince you that understanding contracts and property law is somehow too complicated or inappropriate for women. The women I know who have the most security and independence are those who understand how real estate transactions work, can read legal documents critically, and refuse to depend on other people for their economic survival or professional advancement." The Richardson household had been intellectually stimulating and academically rigorous in ways that had prepared me for the legal career I would eventually build. Dinner conversations had regularly included discussions of legal principles, economic theory, property market analysis, and the importance of building professional expertise that could function reliably under pressure, while also contributing to the justice and fairness of property transactions that affected families' most important financial decisions. Our home had been filled with legal journals, economic research, and the kind of analytical thinking that had made complex legal problems seem solvable rather than overwhelming. By age 14, I'd already been helping my parents with basic legal research and had developed sophisticated understanding of property law concepts, contract interpretation, and the relationship between legal theory and practical outcomes that would characterize my entire approach to real estate law practice. My academic journey had begun at Roosevelt High School in Seattle, a public school known for its rigorous college preparatory programs and its emphasis on developing students' analytical thinking, precise communication, and the kind of intellectual discipline that would serve them well in competitive professional environments throughout their careers. At Roosevelt High, I'd excelled in mathematics, literature, debate, and social studies, while also developing the organizational skills and attention to detail that would characterize my entire approach to professional responsibilities. The school's student body had included children of professionals, business leaders, and university faculty who understood that academic excellence was the primary path to professional recognition and financial independence in Seattle's growing legal and business communities. Miss Richardson, my senior English teacher, had written in a recommendation letter that I'd found years later, demonstrates the rare combination of analytical intelligence and persuasive communication ability that characterizes natural attorneys and advocates. She has the intellectual skills to understand complex legal relationships and the personal presence to represent clients effectively in challenging negotiations and courtroom situations. My senior thesis project at Roosevelt High had focused on the history of women's property rights in Washington state, research that had required me to analyze 19th century legal documents, interview elderly women about their experiences with property ownership, and develop original arguments about how legal reforms had affected women's economic opportunities and family security over several generations. The University of Washington School of Law had been the obvious next step, offering one of the most respected legal programs on the West Coast and a curriculum that combined rigorous analytical training with practical experience in professional legal practice and specialization opportunities in areas like real estate law, business law, and litigation that would prepare graduates for leadership roles in Seattle's legal community. During my 3 years at UW Law, I'd maintained a 3.8 GPA while also working part-time as a legal research assistant for the university's Real Estate Law Institute and completing internships with major Seattle law firms that had provided hands-on experience in every aspect of real estate law practice, from residential transactions to commercial development projects and complex litigation involving property disputes worth millions of dollars. The law program at UW had been particularly demanding, requiring students to develop expertise in constitutional law, contracts, torts, property law, civil procedure, and legal writing, while also completing advanced coursework in specialized areas and demonstrating competence in legal research, client counseling, and courtroom advocacy that would be essential for successful law practice in Washington state's competitive legal market. Margaret has demonstrated exceptional ability in both the analytical and practical aspects of legal education, my property law professor had written during my second year. Her coursework consistently demonstrates sophisticated understanding of complex legal principles while also exhibiting the kind of strategic thinking and attention to detail that characterizes truly effective practicing attorneys. My law school thesis had examined innovative approaches to real estate financing in the Pacific Northwest, focusing on how traditional mortgage structures could be modified to better serve the needs of middle-income families while protecting lenders' interests and promoting responsible development that enhanced community character and property values. The research had required extensive analysis of lending practices, regulatory frameworks, and case law, while also developing original proposals that demonstrated practical applications of legal theory to contemporary housing challenges. The thesis had been selected for publication in the Washington Law Review and had received recognition from the Washington State Bar Association as an outstanding example of how young attorneys could contribute to solving contemporary legal and social challenges, while building expertise in specialized practice areas that would serve both individual clients and broader community interests. After graduating magna cum laude from UW Law in 1976, I'd spent 2 years working for Harrison, Morrison & Associates, a prestigious Seattle firm specializing in real estate law, commercial transactions, and property development that represented some of the region's most significant developers, investors, and business leaders in complex deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The position at Harrison, Morrison & Associates had been excellent preparation for understanding the business and financial aspects of real estate law practice, and had given me experience in the kind of high-stakes problem-solving that would become central to my career specialization in complex property transactions and dispute resolution. The firm's practice had included everything from routine residential closings to major commercial development projects, municipal bond issues for infrastructure development, and complex litigation involving property rights, zoning disputes, and contract enforcement that had required both legal expertise and sophisticated understanding of real estate markets and construction practices. Margaret, you have a natural talent for understanding how real estate deals actually work. My supervising partner at Harrison Morrison and Associates had observed after I'd successfully resolved a complex commercial lease dispute that had threatened to derail a major downtown development project. You don't just understand legal principles. You understand market forces and business relationships and how to structure deals that work for everyone involved while protecting your client's interests. One of my most successful projects at the firm had involved representing a group of small investors in the acquisition and development of a historic Seattle neighborhood that had been threatened by urban renewal demolition. The project had required 6 months of intensive legal research, community organizing, and creative financing arrangements that had allowed the investors to preserve the neighborhood's character while building wealth and providing affordable housing for working families. Ms. Richardson has demonstrated exceptional ability in developing creative legal solutions for complex community development challenges, the investors had written in a testimonial letter. Her understanding of both legal requirements and community needs made it possible for us to achieve our goals while serving broader public interests. Her expertise saved us both money and legal complications while delivering results that exceeded our expectations. The neighborhood preservation project had been particularly meaningful because it had demonstrated how sophisticated legal analysis could make the impossible possible, transforming a situation that others had viewed as hopeless into the foundation for long-term community stability and economic development. The project had also given me my first taste of the satisfaction that came from proving conventional wisdom wrong through superior legal knowledge and creative problem-solving. It was during my time at Harrison, Morrison and Associates that I'd first begun to understand the enormous gap between what most people expected from real estate legal services and what was actually possible when sophisticated legal principles were applied to the challenges of property acquisition, development, and dispute resolution in ways that enhanced people's financial security while building long-term community value. This insight had led directly to my decision to establish my own practice in 1978, specializing in the kind of innovative real estate law that could transform how people thought about property ownership, investment strategies, and the relationship between legal expertise and financial success in Seattle's rapidly growing real estate market. The decision to start Thornton & Associates had been motivated by my desire to focus exclusively on the kind of client-centered real estate law that had become my specialty, working with individuals and families who needed sophisticated legal representation but also wanted an attorney who understood their personal goals and could develop legal strategies that supported their long-term financial and family objectives. Thornton & Associates had begun operations in a converted house in Seattle's Capitol Hill neighborhood, with a staff of 2 paralegals and a portfolio of clients who had followed me from Harrison, Morrison and Associates because they valued the personalized attention and innovative legal approaches that had characterized my work throughout my early career. The firm's first major case had been representing a widow whose late husband's business partners were attempting to force the sale of valuable commercial property through questionable interpretation of partnership agreements and estate planning documents. The case had required 18 months of complex litigation, but my legal research and strategic thinking had ultimately resulted in a settlement that had secured the widow's financial future while establishing important precedents for protecting surviving spouses' property rights. Margaret Thornton has saved my family's financial security through legal expertise that went far beyond what I thought was possible, the client had written in a letter that had become essential marketing material for my developing practice. Her understanding of property law and business relationships enabled me to keep property that other attorneys said I would definitely lose. Her representation changed my life. Over the following decade, Thornton & Associates had built a reputation as Seattle's premier boutique real estate law firm, handling complex transactions and disputes for clients ranging from individual homebuyers to major developers, with a consistent focus on creative legal solutions that protected clients' interests while building long-term value and avoiding unnecessary litigation costs. My approach had consistently emphasized the importance of understanding clients' actual goals and developing legal strategies that served both their immediate needs and their long-term financial and personal objectives, creating legal relationships that enhanced clients' lives rather than simply resolving immediate legal problems. One of my most challenging and rewarding cases during this period had been representing a Native American tribe in their efforts to reclaim traditional fishing and water rights that had been compromised by decades of unfavorable agreements and legal interpretations. The case had required extensive historical research, complex negotiations with federal and state agencies, and innovative legal arguments that had ultimately resulted in a landmark settlement that had restored significant property and resource rights. Margaret Thornton has accomplished legal results that we were told were impossible, the tribal leadership had written in a testimonial that I'd treasured throughout my career. Her understanding of property law, historical research, and negotiation strategies enabled us to reclaim rights that had been lost for generations. Her representation has transformed our community's economic prospects and cultural preservation efforts. By the mid-1980s, Thornton and Associates had become one of Seattle's most respected real estate law practices, with a client base that included some of the region's most successful developers, investors, and business leaders, as well as families and individuals who needed sophisticated legal representation for their property transactions and estate planning needs. The recognition that had meant the most to me during this period had come in 1987, when the Washington State Bar Association had presented me with their Outstanding Achievement in Real Estate Law Award, acknowledging not just individual cases, but my overall contribution to advancing property law practice and client representation standards throughout the Pacific Northwest. Margaret Thornton has spent over a decade proving that real estate law can serve both individual clients and broader community interests through legal excellence that protects property rights while promoting responsible development, the award citation had read. Her work has enhanced Seattle's legal landscape while establishing standards for client representation and legal innovation that have influenced attorneys throughout the region. The 1990s had brought new challenges and opportunities as Seattle's real estate market had experienced dramatic growth and increasing complexity that had required even more sophisticated legal expertise and market knowledge to navigate successfully. My practice had evolved to handle larger and more complex transactions while maintaining the client-centered approach that had built my reputation. During this period, I'd handled some of the most significant real estate transactions in Seattle's history, including the legal representation for the acquisition and development of South Lake Union, the creation of innovative financing structures for affordable housing development, and complex litigation involving environmental regulations and property development rights that had established important precedents for balancing development interests with environmental protection. The most personally satisfying case of my career had occurred in 1995, when I'd represented a group of elderly homeowners whose neighborhood was being destroyed by predatory lending practices and fraudulent property transfers that had been targeting vulnerable seniors and immigrant families. The case had required 2 years of investigation and litigation, but the results had included criminal prosecutions, policy changes, and financial restitution that had protected hundreds of families and had led to stronger consumer protection laws throughout Washington state. Margaret Thornton has protected our community when no one else would listen to our concerns, the homeowners had written in a letter that had been published in the Seattle Times. Her legal expertise and determination to fight for what's right saved our homes and our life savings. Her representation proved that sometimes one attorney with courage and knowledge can make the difference between justice and exploitation. By 2000, when I'd been practicing law for over 20 years, Thornton and Associates had become synonymous with excellence in real estate law throughout the Pacific Northwest. With a track record of successful representations that had protected millions of dollars in client assets, while establishing legal precedents that had influenced property law practice throughout the region. The new millennium had brought opportunities to expand my practice into new areas of specialization, including elder law and estate planning, that had become increasingly important as Seattle's population had aged and property values had continued to appreciate. My expertise in real estate law had provided a natural foundation for understanding the complex intersection of property ownership, estate planning, and long-term financial security that had become central to my practice during the final phase of my career. The most significant achievement of my later career had been the development of innovative estate planning strategies that had combined real estate law expertise with elder law protections to help clients preserve wealth, maintain independence, and transfer property efficiently to future generations, while protecting against the various financial and legal challenges that could threaten seniors' security and autonomy. Margaret Thornton has revolutionized how we think about estate planning for clients with significant real estate assets. Patricia Harrison, a colleague and estate planning specialist, had noted in a professional journal article about my innovative approaches. Her understanding of property law enables her to develop estate plans that protect assets while maintaining flexibility and family control in ways that traditional approaches cannot achieve. The recognition that had meant the most to me had come in 2010, when the American Bar Association had presented me with their Lifetime Achievement Award in Real Estate Law, recognizing not just individual achievements, but my overall contribution to advancing the practice of real estate law and protecting clients' property rights throughout a career that had spanned over 3 decades. Margaret Thornton has spent 35 years proving that legal excellence and client advocacy can coexist with innovation and community service, the award citation had read. Her practice has enhanced the legal profession while demonstrating that real estate law can serve both individual clients and broader public interests through expertise, integrity, and commitment to justice. By the time I'd decided to semi-retire in 2015, Thornton & Associates had handled over 3,000 real estate transactions, representing more than $2 billion in property values, had established important legal precedents that had protected property rights throughout Washington state, and had built a reputation for legal excellence that had influenced real estate law practice throughout the Pacific Northwest. But standing in my home office that September morning, surrounded by the awards, client testimonials, and professional relationships that represented 4 decades of legal achievement, I had no understanding that the family members I'd been supporting and mentoring for years were about to dismiss my expertise as outdated thinking, revealing the true scope of their misunderstanding and setting in motion events that would demonstrate exactly what happened when people underestimated someone with my legal capabilities and determination to protect what I'd worked my entire life to build. The legal expertise, professional relationships, industry recognition, and strategic thinking that Marcus and Stephanie were dismissing as irrelevant to contemporary property management were actually going to become the foundation for teaching them the most comprehensive lesson they'd ever receive about respecting experience, honoring expertise, and understanding that some people respond to manipulation with legal strategies that reshape everyone's understanding of what's possible when knowledge meets determination and unlimited access to legal resources. Sometimes, the people who think your career is just ancient history are about to discover you're actually someone with the legal knowledge and strategic thinking necessary to outmaneuver them completely while teaching them that dismissing someone's professional legacy was the beginning of the most sophisticated legal response they'd ever encounter, and the most expensive mistake they'd ever make in their personal and financial lives. Standing in that office, surrounded by decades of legal expertise and unlimited access to the resources necessary to protect my interests, I had no idea that Marcus and Stephanie were about to reveal their true intentions during a family confrontation that would demonstrate exactly why underestimating a real estate attorney with my experience and determination was about to become the most costly error in judgment they'd ever make. Standing in my home office that September morning, reviewing the family photographs that documented years of what I'd believed was genuine collaboration and mutual respect, I couldn't help but remember how different Marcus and Stephanie's attitude toward my judgment and autonomy had been just 2 years earlier, when they'd regularly sought my legal advice and had expressed sincere gratitude for the opportunities and security that my professional success had provided for our entire family. But what I discovered during that devastating October family meeting would transform my disappointment and sense of betrayal into a cold, calculating determination that would change everything forever and demonstrate that some 70-year-old women fight back with legal strategies that reshape entire family dynamics and property ownership structures in ways that create consequences lasting for generations. The final 18 months of what I'd thought was a harmonious family relationship had actually been a carefully orchestrated campaign designed to undermine my confidence, question my competence, and create legal justification for removing me from my own home while transferring complete control of my most valuable asset to Marcus and Stephanie, who had apparently been planning this outcome since shortly after I'd added Marcus to the property deed in 2021. The systematic nature of their campaign had become apparent during the late summer of 2023, when their suggestions about my living arrangements had evolved from occasional expressions of concern into persistent pressure, accompanied by specific proposals, and what had appeared to be carefully researched recommendations for senior living, facilities that they'd obviously been investigating without my knowledge or consent. "Mom, we've scheduled tours at 3 different senior communities for next week," Stephanie had announced during a family dinner in August 2023, presenting a typed itinerary that she'd apparently prepared in advance. "We think you'll be really impressed with the amenities and social opportunities they offer, and we want to help you explore all your options before making any decisions about your future living arrangements." The presumption that I was in the process of making decisions about leaving my home had been shocking, particularly since I'd never expressed any dissatisfaction with my current living situation or indicated any interest in exploring alternative arrangements. The tone of Stephanie's announcement had suggested that she and Marcus viewed my participation in these tours not as an optional family activity, but as a necessary step in an inevitable transition that they'd already accepted as fact. "I appreciate your concern," I'd replied, trying to maintain family harmony while making clear that I had no intention of leaving my home. "But I'm very happy here and have no plans to change my living situation. I don't think touring senior communities would be a productive use of anyone's time." But Marcus had been prepared with arguments that had revealed the extent of their planning and their coordination in developing strategies for overcoming my resistance to their proposals. "Mom, we understand that leaving your home feels overwhelming," Marcus had said, using the kind of patient tone typically reserved for elderly relatives whose judgment was considered impaired. "But we've done extensive research, and these communities really offer superior lifestyle options compared to trying to maintain such a large property as you get older. The social activities, healthcare support, and maintenance-free living would be so much easier for you." The implication that maintaining my home had become too challenging for me had been both insulting and factually incorrect. Since I'd been successfully managing the property for over a decade with excellent professional help for maintenance, landscaping, and household management that had kept everything functioning perfectly while preserving the property's value and my own comfort. But what had made their pressure even more concerning had been their apparent coordination with outside professionals who had been consulted about my situation without my knowledge or consent, suggesting a level of planning and preparation that went far beyond casual family concern. "We've also spoken with elder care specialists of Seattle about the best approaches for helping seniors transition to more appropriate living arrangements," Stephanie had added, mentioning a consulting firm that specialized in assisting families with elderly relatives who were resistant to necessary lifestyle changes. "They've provided some excellent guidance about timing and communication strategies that can make these transitions much smoother for everyone involved." The revelation that they'd been consulting with elder care specialists about strategies for overcoming my resistance had been the first clear evidence that Marcus and Stephanie viewed me not as a competent adult making reasonable decisions about my own life, but as an elderly person whose opposition to their plans was a problem to be solved through professional intervention and family coordination. Over the following month, their pressure had intensified and had become more sophisticated, involving what appeared to be carefully planned conversations designed to create doubt about my capacity to continue living independently while building a record of family concern that could potentially be used to support legal action if I continued to resist their proposals. "Mom, we're really worried about your safety in such a large house," Marcus had said during a September family gathering, introducing concerns that he'd never previously expressed despite years of visiting the property regularly. The stairs between floors could be dangerous if you fell, and the isolation of being alone in such a big space could be problematic if you had a medical emergency. These newly discovered safety concerns had been particularly insulting given that the mansion featured an elevator that I'd installed during the renovation specifically to ensure accessibility as I aged, comprehensive security systems that included medical alert capabilities, and a location in one of Seattle's most prestigious neighborhoods with excellent emergency services and close proximity to top-quality medical facilities. But Marcus had continued with what had appeared to be a prepared list of concerns that suggested he'd been developing arguments for why my continued residence in the mansion was becoming inappropriate, regardless of my own preferences or actual circumstances. "We're also concerned about the financial burden of maintaining such an expensive property," Marcus had added, introducing economic arguments that had revealed either complete ignorance of my financial situation or deliberate misrepresentation of my capacity to afford my current lifestyle. "The property taxes, insurance, maintenance costs, and utility expenses must be enormous, and we worry that the financial pressure could affect your retirement security." The suggestion that I couldn't afford to maintain my own home had been particularly absurd. Given that my legal practice had provided substantial retirement savings, the property had appreciated significantly since my purchase, and my annual income from investments and part-time legal consulting had been more than sufficient to cover all living expenses while maintaining the lifestyle I'd worked decades to achieve. But what had made their financial concerns even more suspicious had been their apparent detailed knowledge of the property's carrying costs and their suggestions about how these expenses could be reduced through changes in ownership or management structure that would benefit Marcus and Stephanie, while reducing my financial security and independence. "If you move to a senior community, we could handle the sale of this property and help you invest the proceeds in ways that would provide steady income while eliminating the risks and expenses of property ownership," Stephanie had suggested, outlining a plan that would have transferred control of my primary asset to them while reducing my housing to whatever senior living facility they deemed appropriate. The proposal to sell my home and use the proceeds to fund my care in an institutional setting had been the clearest indication yet that Marcus and Stephanie viewed my property not as my home and financial security, but as a family asset that should be managed according to their priorities rather than my preferences. The breaking point had finally come during our family dinner on October 15th, 2023, when Marcus and Stephanie had decided to abandon subtle pressure in favor of direct confrontation designed to force my compliance with their plans or to create justification for taking legal action to override my resistance. "Mom, we need to have a serious conversation about your future," Marcus had announced as soon as we'd finished eating, using a tone that had suggested this was a family intervention rather than a consultation. "Stephanie and I have been discussing your situation extensively, and we've concluded that continuing to live in this house alone is no longer safe or practical for someone your age." The presumption that they had authority to reach conclusions about my living arrangements had been shocking enough, but what had followed had been a systematic attack on my competence and autonomy that had revealed the true scope of their planning and their complete disrespect for my rights and preferences. "We've consulted with geriatric specialists, elder care attorneys, and property management experts," Stephanie had continued, producing a folder of documents that she'd apparently prepared for the meeting. "Everyone agrees that seniors living alone in large properties face significant risks that increase dramatically after age 70, and that family intervention is often necessary to prevent serious problems. The revelation that they'd been consulting with attorneys and specialists about my situation without my knowledge had been the first clear evidence that their concern was not about my welfare, but about establishing legal grounds for overriding my decision-making authority and gaining control of my property and financial affairs. We've identified several excellent senior living communities that would be perfect for your needs, Marcus had added, producing brochures and pricing information that he'd obviously been collecting for months. Cascade Senior Living has a beautiful apartment available that would be much more manageable than this house, and they provide all the services you need, including meals, housekeeping, social activities, and on-site medical support. The assumption that I would simply accept their housing selection and abandon the home I'd worked decades to purchase and maintain had been insulting enough, but their detailed knowledge of availability and pricing had suggested they'd been making inquiries and possibly even preliminary arrangements without my consent or knowledge. But the most shocking revelation had come when Marcus had announced their timeline for implementing these changes and their expectations for my cooperation with their plans. "We think the transition should happen before the end of the year," Marcus had said, as though my cooperation was a foregone conclusion. "The apartment at Cascade will be available in December, and we can coordinate the move to minimize disruption, while giving us time to prepare this house for sale in the spring real estate market." The casual announcement that they'd been planning to sell my home had been the final confirmation that Marcus and Stephanie viewed me not as the property owner with decision-making authority, but as an elderly dependent whose housing and financial arrangements should be managed according to their judgment rather than my preferences. "We've already spoken with Premier Property Management about listing strategies that would maximize sale price," Stephanie had added, revealing that they'd been consulting with real estate professionals about marketing my home without my knowledge or consent. "They think we could expect offers in the 4 to 5 million range, which would provide excellent funding for your long-term care while also creating some family financial security." The phrase family financial security had been the clearest indication yet that Marcus and Stephanie viewed the sale of my property as benefiting them rather than simply funding my care, and that their motivation involved their own financial interests rather than genuine concern for my welfare. My response had been immediate and unequivocal. I'd told them that I had no intention of leaving my home, that I was completely satisfied with my current living arrangements, that I was fully capable of managing my own affairs, and that their interference in my personal and financial decisions was both inappropriate and unwelcome. "I appreciate your concern," I'd said, trying to maintain some semblance of family civility while making my position absolutely clear. "But I'm not interested in moving to a senior community. I don't need help managing my property or finances, and I expect you to respect my decision to continue living in my own home for as long as I choose to do so." But Marcus's response had revealed that he and Stephanie had been prepared for my resistance and had developed strategies for overcoming my opposition that went far beyond family persuasion. "Mom, we understand this is difficult for you to accept," Marcus had said, "but we have legal responsibilities as your family to ensure your safety and financial security, even if you don't agree with our assessment of the situation. If you're not willing to make these changes voluntarily, we may need to explore other options for protecting your interests." The threat of legal action to override my decision-making authority had been the final confirmation that Marcus and Stephanie viewed our family relationship not as one between equal adults, but as one in which they had authority to make decisions about my life, regardless of my preferences or legal rights. "We've consulted with elder law attorneys about the procedures for helping families when senior family members are making decisions that put them at risk," Stephanie had added, making clear that they'd been researching legal strategies for gaining control of my affairs against my will. "There are established procedures for family intervention when seniors are no longer capable of making appropriate decisions about their safety and financial security." The implication that I was mentally incompetent and that they had legal grounds for seeking guardianship or conservatorship had been both shocking and infuriating, particularly given my continued professional activity, my successful management of complex legal and financial affairs, and my clear competence in all areas of daily living. That evening, after Marcus and Stephanie had left, I'd made the decision that would change everything forever and would demonstrate exactly what happened when people underestimated someone with my legal expertise, professional relationships, and determination to protect my rights and property, against family members who had mistaken generosity for weakness and assumed that age meant vulnerability. Rather than accepting their ultimatum or engaging in further family negotiations that they clearly viewed as formalities before implementing their predetermined plans, I would use my 43 years of real estate law expertise to demonstrate that some people fight back with legal strategies that permanently reshape family dynamics and property ownership in ways that create consequences lasting for generations. My first step had been to contact Patricia Harrison, my longtime attorney and estate planning specialist, to discuss the legal options available for protecting my property rights and personal autonomy against family members who were apparently planning to challenge my competence and seek control of my financial affairs. Margaret, what Marcus and Stephanie are describing sounds like preparation for a guardianship or conservatorship petition, Patricia had confirmed during our emergency consultation the following morning. If they're consulting with elder law attorneys and building a record of family concern about your capacity, they're likely planning legal action that could give them authority over your financial and personal decisions, regardless of your preferences. Patricia's legal analysis had confirmed my worst fears about Marcus and Stephanie's intentions, while also providing clarity about the legal strategies available for protecting myself against their planned intervention. The good news is that you have several advantages in this situation, Patricia had continued. Your continued professional activity demonstrates ongoing competence. Your successful management of complex legal and financial affairs proves your capacity, and your property ownership gives you legal rights that would be very difficult for them to challenge successfully. But Patricia had also warned me about the potential effectiveness of guardianship proceedings, particularly when family members were willing to present coordinated testimony about an elderly person's declining capacity and need for protective intervention. Even competent seniors can lose guardianship proceedings if family members present compelling evidence of risk or impaired judgment, Patricia had explained. The legal standard for guardianship is whether intervention is necessary to protect someone from harm, not whether they're completely incompetent, and courts often err on the side of caution when families express concern about elderly relatives. The sobering reality that I could potentially lose control of my property and personal affairs despite my obvious competence had motivated me to develop a comprehensive legal strategy that would permanently protect my rights while demonstrating to Marcus and Stephanie the consequences of underestimating someone with my expertise and determination. My strategic response had been based on my understanding that the best defense against their planned legal action would be to eliminate the property ownership structure that they were planning to exploit while creating new legal arrangements that would prevent future challenges to my autonomy or property rights. Over the following month, I'd worked with Patricia and a team of legal specialists to develop a comprehensive estate planning and asset protection strategy that would accomplish several objectives: protect my property rights against family challenges, ensure my continued autonomy over personal and financial decisions, create legal consequences for Marcus and Stephanie's betrayal, and establish new ownership and inheritance structures that would reflect my revised understanding of family relationships and loyalties. The true centerpiece of my legal strategy had been the creation of the Margaret Thornton Irrevocable Trust, a sophisticated legal structure that would remove the lakefront mansion from individual ownership while ensuring my continued exclusive use and control of the property during my lifetime, with ownership ultimately passing to charitable organizations and institutions that had supported my professional development and community involvement throughout my career. This trust structure will accomplish everything you want to achieve, Patricia had explained as we'd finalized the legal documents. You'll retain complete control over the property during your lifetime. Marcus will lose all ownership rights and inheritance expectations, and the trust provisions will make it legally impossible for anyone to challenge your capacity or force changes to your living arrangements. The irrevocable trust had been funded by transferring the mansion and all related assets out of joint ownership with Marcus into the trust structure, effectively removing his name from the deed and eliminating any legal standing he might have had for making decisions about the property or challenging my management of my own affairs. But the trust structure had been only the first element of my comprehensive response to Marcus and Stephanie's betrayal. I'd also implemented new estate planning arrangements that had removed them from any inheritance expectations while directing my assets to organizations and individuals who had demonstrated genuine respect for my autonomy and appreciation for my professional contributions. The new will and estate plan had allocated my financial assets to a combination of charitable organizations focused on women's legal education, elder rights advocacy, and property rights protection, with specific provisions ensuring that Marcus and Stephanie would receive notification of their disinheritance and the reasons for my decision to exclude them from any financial benefits from my estate. I want them to understand that their behavior has consequences, I'd told Patricia as we'd drafted the new estate planning documents. They assumed they could manipulate and control me because they thought I was vulnerable and dependent on their approval. I want them to learn that some people fight back in ways that permanently change family relationships and financial expectations. The legal implementation of these changes had been completed by early December 2023, creating a new property ownership and estate planning structure that had eliminated Marcus's ownership rights while ensuring my continued security and autonomy regardless of any future family challenges or legal actions they might attempt. But my legal response had included one additional element designed to demonstrate the full extent of my resources and determination while teaching Marcus and Stephanie a lesson about the consequences of underestimating someone with my expertise and access to legal remedies. On December 20th, 2023, I'd arranged for Marcus and Stephanie to receive formal legal notification of the property ownership changes, estate planning revisions, and the specific legal grounds for these decisions, delivered by process server in a manner that would ensure they understood both the permanence of my decisions and the futility of any legal challenges they might be considering. The notification had included copies of the trust documents, the new property deed showing the trust as sole owner, documentation of their consultations with elder law attorneys that my private investigator had uncovered, and a detailed legal memorandum explaining why their planned guardianship petition would be both unsuccessful and potentially subject to sanctions for frivolous litigation against a competent adult. This should make very clear that their plan to gain control of your property has not only failed, but has permanently damaged their relationship with you and eliminated any financial benefits they might have expected from your estate, Patricia had explained as we'd prepared the notification documents. The breaking point that had triggered my comprehensive legal response had occurred on January 15, 2024, when Marcus and Stephanie had made their final, desperate attempt to regain control of the situation by physically preventing my access to my own home while attempting to force my relocation to the senior living facility they'd selected. I'd returned from a week-long legal conference in San Francisco to discover that the locks on the mansion had been changed, my personal belongings had been packed by strangers and moved to storage, and Marcus and Stephanie had taken up residence in my home while claiming that they'd acted under emergency circumstances to protect my safety and welfare. "Mom, we were worried when you didn't return our calls while you were traveling," Marcus had said when I'd confronted them about the locks and the unauthorized occupation of my property. "We decided it was time to implement the transition plan we'd discussed, and we've arranged for you to move into Cascade Senior Living this week." The assumption that they had authority to change my locks, pack my belongings, and relocate me against my will had been the final demonstration of their complete misunderstanding of both my legal rights and my capacity to protect myself against their manipulation. My response had been immediate and comprehensive. I'd contacted the King County Sheriff's Department to report the unlawful occupation of my property, had initiated legal proceedings for trespassing and elder abuse, and had implemented the final provisions of my legal strategy that would permanently resolve the conflict while demonstrating the consequences of their assumptions about my vulnerability. "Ma'am, we need to see documentation proving your ownership of this property," the sheriff's deputy had said when he'd arrived to investigate my complaint about the unauthorized occupation of my home. My response had been to produce the trust, documents, the property deed showing the Margaret Thornton Irrevocable Trust as sole owner, and the legal memorandum explaining that Marcus and Stephanie had no lawful basis for occupying the property or preventing my access to my own home. "The individuals currently in the house are my son and daughter-in-law," I'd explained to the deputy. "They changed the locks and moved my belongings without permission while I was traveling, and they're claiming authority over my property that they do not legally possess." The deputy's review of the legal documents had confirmed that Marcus and Stephanie had no ownership rights or legal standing to occupy the property, and that their actions constituted trespassing regardless of their family relationship to me or their claims about my welfare. "Sir, ma'am, you need to gather your belongings and vacate this property immediately," the deputy had informed Marcus and Stephanie. "You have no legal right to be here, and your continued occupation constitutes criminal trespass. You have 24 hours to remove your belongings, and any future unauthorized entry will result in arrest." The shock on Marcus and Stephanie's faces when they'd realized that their carefully planned strategy had not only failed but had resulted in their own eviction from property they'd assumed they controlled had been the first indication that they were beginning to understand the magnitude of their miscalculation about my capabilities and resources. "Mom, you can't do this to family," Stephanie had said as they'd been forced to pack their belongings under police supervision. "We were only trying to help you make better decisions about your safety and financial security." My response had been to hand them copies of the legal documents that had permanently removed them from any property rights or inheritance expectations, along with documentation of their unauthorized consultations with elder law attorneys and their attempts to have me declared incompetent without legal grounds. "You weren't trying to help me," I'd replied. "You were trying to steal my property and control my life based on assumptions about my age and vulnerability. You've learned that some people fight back with legal strategies that permanently change family relationships and financial consequences." The final resolution had come 6 weeks later, when Marcus and Stephanie's attorney had contacted Patricia to inquire about the possibility of reaching a settlement that would restore their inheritance rights in exchange for their agreement to respect my autonomy and abandon any future challenges to my competence or property ownership. "Ms. Thornton has made her position very clear," Patricia had responded to their settlement inquiry. "The trust and estate planning arrangements are irrevocable, and there are no circumstances under which she would consider restoring inheritance rights to family members who attempted to have her declared incompetent and steal her property." The attorney's response had included threats of litigation, challenging the trust documents and estate planning changes. But Patricia's legal analysis had made clear that such challenges would be both unsuccessful and potentially subject to sanctions. For frivolous litigation against clearly valid legal arrangements, any litigation challenging these arrangements would be frivolous and would likely result in court sanctions against the plaintiffs and their attorney, Patricia had warned. "Ms. Thornton's competence is obvious. The legal documents are perfectly valid, and the trust structure is specifically designed to prevent the kind of family challenges they're threatening." The final vindication had come 8 months later, when Seattle Magazine had featured the Margaret Thornton Trust in an article about innovative approaches to estate planning and elder rights protection, highlighting how my legal strategy had successfully protected an elderly woman's autonomy against family members who had attempted to exploit assumptions about age and vulnerability. Margaret Thornton has created a model for how seniors can protect themselves against financial exploitation and family manipulation, the article had noted. Her innovative use of trust structures and estate planning demonstrates that legal expertise and strategic thinking can prevent elder abuse while ensuring that family betrayal has permanent consequences. The article had been accompanied by photographs of the lakefront mansion, now permanently protected under the trust structure, and interviews with legal experts who had praised the sophisticated approach to combining property protection with elder rights advocacy. Standing in my magnificent home office 18 months after the resolution of the conflict, overlooking the lake views that would remain mine for life, while ultimately benefiting charitable organizations that shared my values rather than family members who had tried to exploit my generosity, I felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge and everything, to do with the complete vindication of my right to live according to my own values and priorities, while demonstrating that some people fight back with consequences that last for generations. The lakefront mansion had become more than just my home. It had become a symbol of what was possible when experience met determination and unlimited legal expertise. The trust structure had inspired other seniors throughout the Seattle area to pursue similar arrangements, and my story had changed community attitudes about aging, autonomy, and the importance of protecting elderly people's rights against family members who mistake generosity for weakness. But perhaps most importantly, the legal strategy had taught Marcus and Stephanie a lesson about respect, consequences, and the dangers of underestimating someone based on age-related assumptions that had nothing to do with actual capabilities or legal resources. Margaret, your legal response has become a model for elder rights protection throughout Washington state, Patricia had said during a recent review of the trust arrangements. You've demonstrated that family betrayal can have permanent consequences, and that some people have the knowledge and resources to protect themselves completely against manipulation and exploitation. The final irony had come 6 months ago, when Marcus and Stephanie had been forced to sell their own home due to financial difficulties related to legal fees and lost income from their failed attempt to gain control of my property. Their assumption that they could manipulate a vulnerable elderly woman had instead cost them hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal expenses, while permanently eliminating their inheritance expectations and family relationships. If someone in your life is trying to control your decisions while treating you as incompetent based on assumptions about age or vulnerability, remember my story. Remember that family relationships don't give anyone authority over your property or personal decisions, and that some people have the legal knowledge and resources necessary to protect themselves completely against manipulation and exploitation. Remember that generosity and trust are not the same as weakness or vulnerability, and that people who mistake kindness for opportunity might discover they've challenged someone with the expertise and determination to create permanent consequences for betrayal and manipulation. What's your story? Have you ever had to protect yourself against family members who assumed they could control your decisions or your property? Share it in the comments below, and remember to like and subscribe for more stories about turning family betrayal into complete vindication and proving that some people fight back with legal strategies that permanently reshape family dynamics and financial relationships. Because sometimes the best response to people who try to lock you out of your own home is showing them exactly what happens when they underestimate someone with 4 decades of legal expertise and unlimited determination to protect what they've worked their entire life to build. Marcus and Stephanie thought they could change my locks and control my life. What they actually did was inspire the most comprehensive legal response of my career, while learning that some 70-year-old women fight back with consequences more permanent and more costly than anything they could ever imagine. Sometimes, the people who think your best days are behind you are about to discover you're actually someone with the legal knowledge and strategic thinking necessary to outmaneuver them completely while teaching them that respect and autonomy aren't negotiable. At any age. That's a lesson worth $4.8 million in protected property value. And every dollar was worth it to prove that family betrayal has permanent consequences, and that some dreams of manipulation are too dangerous to pursue against someone with my expertise, resources, and unlimited determination to prove everyone wrong. Justice served, property protected, autonomy secured, legacy preserved, family betrayal answered with permanent consequences. The view from 71 is spectacular when you're surrounded by legal protections rather than family manipulation. Marcus and Stephanie learned that changing someone's locks was the beginning of the most expensive legal lesson they'd ever receive, and the most comprehensive demonstration of what happens when you underestimate someone with 43 years of real estate law expertise and unlimited determination to protect their rights. Respect your elders, especially when they have the legal knowledge to permanently reshape your financial future. Standing in my lakefront mansion's main library 2 years after the final resolution of the conflict with Marcus and Stephanie, surrounded by leather-bound legal volumes and framed photographs documenting a lifetime of professional achievement and personal satisfaction, I found myself reflecting on how completely the power dynamics in my family had shifted and how thoroughly my strategic legal response had accomplished objectives that went far beyond simply protecting my property, rights, and personal autonomy. The comprehensive vindication that had resulted from my decision to fight back against Marcus and Stephanie's manipulation had created consequences that extended throughout Seattle's legal community, had influenced estate planning practices throughout Washington state, and had established new standards for protecting elderly people's rights against family members who mistake generosity for vulnerability and assume that age automatically means diminished capacity for strategic thinking and legal self-defense. But perhaps most satisfying had been watching Marcus and Stephanie gradually come to understand the full magnitude of their miscalculation about my capabilities and resources, as the long-term consequences of their attempted manipulation had continued to unfold in ways that had permanently altered their financial security, professional reputation, and family relationships in ways they were still discovering 2 years after their eviction from my property. The immediate aftermath of their forced departure from my home had been characterized by a series of increasingly desperate attempts to find legal strategies for reversing the property ownership changes and estate planning revisions that had eliminated their inheritance expectations while permanently protecting my autonomy against future family challenges or manipulation attempts. Marcus had initially contacted 3 different law firms seeking representation for litigation, challenging the Margaret Thornton irrevocable trust, the property transfer documents, and my mental capacity at the time these legal arrangements had been implemented. But each consultation had resulted in the same conclusion. The legal documents were perfectly valid, my competence was obvious and well documented, and any litigation challenging these arrangements would be frivolous and potentially subject to court sanctions for harassment of a competent adult who had made reasonable decisions about property ownership and estate planning. Mr. Whitmore, your mother's trust documents are textbook examples of proper estate planning, attorney David Richardson at Morrison & Associates had explained during Marcus's consultation. The legal structure is sophisticated and completely valid. Your mother's competence is obvious, and frankly, your own actions in changing her locks and attempting to force her relocation would actually support her decision to exclude you from her estate rather than provide grounds for challenging her judgment. The legal reality that Marcus and Stephanie's own behavior had provided the strongest evidence for my competence and their unsuitability as beneficiaries had been a particularly bitter irony that had undermined any potential legal challenges, while reinforcing the permanent nature of the consequences they were facing. Stephanie had pursued a different strategy, consulting with elder abuse specialists and family therapists about procedures for repairing family relationships and demonstrating changed behavior that might persuade me to reconsider the trust arrangements and estate planning decisions. But these consultations had also failed to provide any realistic hope for reversing the legal consequences of their betrayal. Mrs. Whitmore, your mother-in-law's legal arrangements are specifically designed to prevent the kind of family pressure and manipulation that you and your husband attempted, Dr. Patricia Williams, a geriatric psychology specialist, had explained during Stephanie's consultation. Irrevocable trusts exist precisely because they cannot be changed based on family pressure or emotional appeals, and attempting to pressure her further would likely be considered elder abuse under Washington state law. The professional confirmation that their attempts to restore family relationships would be both unsuccessful and potentially illegal had gradually forced Marcus and Stephanie to confront the reality that their actions had created permanent consequences, that no amount of regret or changed behavior could reverse. But the true extent of their miscalculation had become apparent only gradually, as the financial and professional consequences of their failed manipulation attempt had continued to compound over the months and years following their eviction from my property. The legal fees associated with their consultations with multiple attorneys, elder care specialists, and family therapists had exceeded $85,000 during the first year alone, representing a significant drain on their financial resources that had been compounded by Marcus's lost income from clients who had become uncomfortable with his professional judgment after learning about his attempt to have his own mother declared incompetent without legal grounds. "Marcus, I have to be honest with you," James Patterson, one of Marcus's longtime corporate clients, had said during a difficult conversation 6 months after the property conflict had become public knowledge. "Your judgment in trying to take control of your mother's property raises serious questions about your decision-making and professional ethics. We've decided to transfer our legal work to another firm." The loss of major clients had been followed by Marcus's resignation from the Washington State Bar Association's Real Estate Law Committee after colleagues had expressed concerns about his suitability for leadership roles given his attempted manipulation of family property ownership and his failure to understand basic elder rights protections. The committee feels that Marcus's actions toward his mother demonstrate a fundamental misunderstanding of property rights and elder law that makes his continued participation in real estate law policy development inappropriate. Committee Chair Rebecca Morrison had explained in a letter that had effectively ended Marcus's aspirations for leadership roles in the state's legal community. Stephanie's real estate career had suffered similar consequences, as her professional reputation had been damaged by the revelation that she'd been planning to force an elderly client's mother out of her home while gaining control of valuable property through manipulation and family pressure rather than legitimate business practices. "Stephanie, several clients have expressed concerns about your professional judgment and ethics," her broker at Windermere Real Estate had explained during a performance review meeting. "The situation with your mother-in-law suggests that you might be willing to use family relationships and elder manipulation to gain control of valuable properties, which raises serious questions about your suitability for representing clients in major real estate transactions." The professional consequences had been followed by social ostracism within Seattle's legal and business communities, as word of their attempted manipulation had spread through professional networks and social circles that had previously provided both business opportunities and personal relationships. "Margaret, I have to tell you that Marcus and Stephanie's behavior toward you has really shocked people throughout the legal community," Patricia Harrison had reported during one of our regular consultations. "Attorneys who've known you for decades are appalled that your own son would try to have you declared incompetent and steal your property. Their reputation in professional circles has been permanently damaged." The social consequences had been particularly devastating for Stephanie, who had depended on social networking and community connections for real estate referrals and business development. The revelation that she'd been planning to force her elderly mother-in-law into institutional care while profiting from the sale of her property had made her persona non grata in many of the social circles that had previously provided both friendship and business opportunities. But perhaps the most significant long-term consequence had been the impact on Marcus and Stephanie's own children, Emma and James, who had gradually come to understand that their parents had attempted to steal their grandmother's home and force her into a nursing home against her will in order to gain control of valuable property that they'd wanted to sell for their own financial benefit. "Grandma Margaret, why did Mom and Dad try to take your house away from you?" 12-year-old Emma had asked during one of our supervised visits that had been arranged through family court after I'd filed for grandparent visitation rights to maintain relationships with the children despite their parents' behavior. My explanation had been age-appropriate but honest. "Emma, sometimes adults make very poor decisions based on greed and assumptions about other people's capabilities. Your parents thought they could control my life and take my property because they assumed I was too old and weak to protect myself. They learned that some people fight back with legal strategies that create permanent consequences for betrayal and manipulation. The children's gradual understanding of their parents' actions had created family dynamics that had been both painful for Marcus and Stephanie and educational for Emma and James about the importance of respecting elderly people's rights and autonomy, regardless of family relationships or financial interests. "I don't want to live with people who would steal an old lady's house," 10-year-old James had announced during one particularly difficult family counseling session. "Grandma Margaret worked her whole life to buy that house, and Mom and Dad tried to take it away from her just because they wanted money." The children's moral clarity about their parents' behavior had created additional pressure on Marcus and Stephanie, while reinforcing my decision to exclude them from my estate planning and to direct my assets toward organizations and individuals who shared my values rather than family members who had demonstrated willingness to exploit elderly relatives for financial gain. The broader community impact of my legal strategy had been equally significant. As news of the innovative trust structure and successful elder rights protection had spread throughout Seattle's legal and social services communities, inspiring other seniors to seek similar protections against family exploitation, while establishing new standards for estate planning that prioritized autonomy protection over traditional family inheritance expectations. The Margaret Thornton Trust had been featured in multiple legal journals and professional publications as a model for combining property protection with elder rights advocacy, demonstrating how sophisticated legal planning could prevent family manipulation while ensuring that elderly people's wishes were respected, regardless of family pressure or assumptions about diminished capacity. Margaret Thornton has created a new paradigm for elder rights protection, Professor Janet Richardson at the University of Washington Law School had written in an article for the Washington Law Review. Her innovative use of irrevocable trust structures demonstrates how legal expertise can protect elderly people's autonomy while creating permanent consequences for family members who attempt exploitation based on assumptions about age and vulnerability. The academic recognition had been accompanied by invitations to speak at legal conferences and elder rights seminars throughout the Pacific Northwest, providing opportunities to share my experience and educate other legal professionals about strategies for protecting elderly clients against family manipulation and financial exploitation. Margaret's story demonstrates that the best protection against elder abuse is often preventive legal planning that eliminates opportunities for family exploitation while ensuring that elderly people retain complete control over their assets and personal decisions, I'd explained during a keynote presentation at the Washington State Elder Law Conference. The key is understanding that family relationships don't automatically create authority over someone else's property or personal choices, and that legal planning can create structures that make manipulation impossible regardless of family pressure or emotional appeals. The professional speaking opportunities had been followed by consulting arrangements with law firms throughout Washington state, providing advice and expertise for estate planning clients who wanted to protect themselves against potential family challenges while ensuring that their property and assets would ultimately benefit organizations and individuals who shared their values, rather than family members who might view inheritance as entitlement rather than gift. Margaret, your expertise in combining property protection with elder rights advocacy has become invaluable for our practice, attorney Sarah Chen at Bellevue Estate Planning Associates had explained during one of our consulting arrangements. Clients who've heard your story want similar protections, and your legal strategies have helped us develop estate plans that truly serve our clients' interests, rather than just traditional family expectations. The consulting work had provided both professional satisfaction and additional income while demonstrating that my legal expertise remained valuable and relevant despite my age and despite Marcus and Stephanie's assumptions about my declining capabilities and professional obsolescence. But perhaps the most meaningful long-term consequence had been the establishment of the Margaret Thornton Foundation for Elder Rights Protection, a charitable organization funded by the trust structure that would continue my work in protecting elderly people's autonomy and property rights long after my death, while ensuring that the lakefront mansion would ultimately serve community purposes rather than private family interests. The foundation's mission had been designed to reflect my values and professional legacy, providing legal assistance to elderly people facing family manipulation, funding research into elder rights protection, supporting legislative advocacy for stronger elder abuse prevention, and maintaining the Lakefront Mansion as a conference center and retreat facility for organizations working on aging and elder rights issues. The Margaret Thornton Foundation will ensure that your commitment to elder rights protection continues in perpetuity, Foundation Director Dr. Elizabeth Barnes had explained during our planning meetings. The mansion will serve as both a symbol of successful elder rights advocacy and a practical resource for organizations working to protect elderly people's autonomy and dignity. The foundation structure had also included provisions for Emma and James to receive educational scholarships and mentoring support if they demonstrated commitment to elder rights advocacy or legal careers focused on protecting vulnerable populations, providing opportunities for positive family legacy despite their parents' behavior. I want Emma and James to understand that family relationships should be based on respect and mutual support rather than exploitation and manipulation, I'd explained to the foundation board. If they choose careers focused on helping vulnerable people and protecting individual rights, they'll have opportunities to benefit from educational support and professional mentoring regardless of their parents' actions. The educational provisions had created additional complexity for Marcus and Stephanie, as their children had begun expressing interest in legal careers focused on elder rights protection and family law, partly inspired by their understanding of their grandmother's successful defense against their parents' manipulation. I want to be a lawyer like Grandma Margaret and help old people protect themselves against their families, Emma had announced during a school career presentation. Some families try to steal old people's houses and put them in nursing homes, but lawyers can help them fight back and keep their homes and their money. The children's career aspirations had created both pride for me and additional discomfort for Marcus and Stephanie, as Emma and James had begun to view their grandmother's legal career as a model for using professional expertise to protect vulnerable people against exploitation rather than viewing aging as a process that automatically diminished capabilities and autonomy. The 2-year anniversary of my legal victory had been marked by a celebration at the mansion, hosted by the foundation and attended by legal professionals, elder rights advocates, and community leaders who had been inspired by my story and wanted to support continued work in protecting elderly people's autonomy and property rights. Margaret Thornton has demonstrated that age is not a limitation on strategic thinking, legal expertise, or the ability to create permanent consequences for family betrayal, keynote speaker Judge Patricia Williams had said during the anniversary celebration. Her legal strategy has protected not just her own rights, but has established new standards for elder rights protection that will benefit vulnerable seniors throughout Washington state for generations to come. The celebration had been held in the mansion's main reception rooms, overlooking the lake views that would remain mine for life while ultimately serving community purposes rather than enriching family members who had tried to exploit my generosity and trust for their own financial benefit. As I'd stood in the library that evening, surrounded by legal colleagues, community leaders, and foundation supporters who understood and appreciated my commitment to elder rights protection, I'd felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge against Marcus and Stephanie, and everything to do with the knowledge that my legal expertise and strategic response had created lasting positive change for vulnerable elderly people throughout the region. The final irony had occurred just 3 months ago, when Marcus and Stephanie had been forced to declare bankruptcy due to the combination of legal fees, lost income, and financial pressures that had resulted from their failed attempt to manipulate and control me. Their assumption that they could exploit an elderly woman's supposed vulnerability had instead cost them their home, their professional reputations, and their financial security, while permanently eliminating any possibility of benefiting from my estate. Margaret, I thought you should know that Marcus and Stephanie filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy last week, Patricia Harrison had reported during our most recent consultation. The financial consequences of their actions have continued to compound, and they've lost everything they were trying to protect by gaining control of your property. The news of their bankruptcy had been both satisfying vindication of my legal strategy and confirmation that some actions create consequences that extend far beyond the immediate conflict, reshaping family dynamics and financial relationships in ways that last for generations. They thought they could change my locks and control my life, I'd reflected during our conversation. What they actually did was inspire the most comprehensive legal response of my career, while learning that some 70-year-old women fight back with strategies that permanently alter family relationships and financial futures. Standing in my magnificent home office this morning, overlooking the lake views that will remain protected under the trust structure for the remainder of my life, while ultimately serving community purposes that reflect my values and professional legacy. I feel a deep satisfaction that comes from knowing that my response to family betrayal has created positive change that will benefit vulnerable elderly people for generations to come. The lakefront mansion has become more than just my home. It has become a symbol of successful elder rights protection and a practical resource for organizations working to prevent elder abuse and family exploitation. The trust structure has inspired hundreds of other seniors to seek similar protections, and my story has changed community attitudes about aging, autonomy, and the importance of respecting elderly people's rights, regardless of family relationships or financial interests. But perhaps most importantly, my legal strategy has demonstrated that experience, expertise, and strategic thinking are not diminished by age when they are supported by professional knowledge and determination to protect what one has worked a lifetime to build. Margaret, your legal response has become the gold standard for elder rights protection throughout the Pacific Northwest, Dr. Elizabeth Barnes had said during our most recent foundation meeting. You've proven that family betrayal can have permanent consequences, and that some people have the knowledge and resources to protect themselves completely against manipulation and exploitation. The grandchildren, Emma and James, now visit regularly and have come to understand that their grandmother's legal victory represents something more significant than a family property dispute. It represents the principle that respect and autonomy are not negotiable regardless of age or family relationships, and that some people have the expertise and determination necessary to create permanent consequences for betrayal and manipulation. Grandma Margaret, I'm proud that you didn't let Mom and Dad steal your house, Emma had said during our most recent visit. You showed them that old people aren't weak, and that families can't just take things away from people because they think they're too old to fight back. The children's understanding of the broader principles involved in my legal strategy has provided hope that future generations will approach aging and family relationships with greater respect for individual autonomy and recognition that experience and expertise are assets to be valued rather than limitations to be managed. If someone in your life is trying to control your decisions while treating you as incompetent, based on assumptions about age or vulnerability, remember my story. Remember that family relationships don't give anyone authority over your property or personal decisions, and that some people have the legal knowledge and resources necessary to protect themselves completely against manipulation and exploitation, while creating lasting consequences for those who mistake generosity for weakness. Remember that the best response to people who try to lock you out of your own home is sometimes a comprehensive legal strategy that permanently reshapes family dynamics while demonstrating that respect and autonomy are not negotiable at any age, and that some dreams of manipulation are too dangerous to pursue against someone with the expertise and determination to fight back with consequences that last for generations. What's your story? Have you ever had to protect yourself against family members who assumed they could control your decisions or exploit your trust? Share it in the comments below, and remember to like and subscribe for more stories about turning family betrayal into lasting vindication and proving that some people fight back with legal strategies that permanently protect their rights while creating positive change for vulnerable people throughout their communities. Because sometimes the most important battles are not just about protecting your own property and autonomy, but about establishing principles and precedents that will protect other vulnerable people against similar exploitation and manipulation for generations to come. Marcus and Stephanie thought they could change my locks and control my life based on assumptions about my age and vulnerability. What they actually did was inspire the most comprehensive elder rights protection strategy in Washington state history, while learning that some 71-year-old women fight back with legal expertise that creates permanent consequences more far-reaching and more costly than anything they could ever imagine. Sometimes the people who think your best days are behind you are about to discover you're actually someone with the legal knowledge and strategic thinking necessary to outmaneuver them completely while building a legacy that will protect vulnerable people and advance justice for generations to come. That's a lesson worth $4.8 million in protected property value, a charitable foundation that will continue my work in perpetuity, and the knowledge that family betrayal ultimately led to positive change that will benefit thousands of elderly people throughout the Pacific Northwest for decades to come. Justice served. Legacy established. Elder rights advanced. Community protected. Family betrayal transformed into lasting positive change. The view from 71 is spectacular when you're surrounded by legal protections rather than family manipulation, when your property is permanently secured under trust structures that reflect your values rather than family greed, and when your professional legacy continues through charitable work that will protect vulnerable people long after you're gone. Marcus and Stephanie learned that changing someone's locks was the beginning of the most expensive legal lesson they'd ever receive, the most comprehensive demonstration of elder rights protection in state history, and the most costly mistake they'd ever make in terms of their financial security, professional reputation, and family relationships. Respect your elders, especially when they have the legal expertise to permanently reshape not just your financial future, but the entire landscape of elder rights protection in ways that will influence policy and practice for generations to come. Because sometimes the best revenge is not just personal vindication, but creating lasting change that ensures other vulnerable people will never face the same exploitation and manipulation that you successfully defeated through legal expertise, strategic thinking, and unlimited determination to protect what you worked your entire life to build. The Margaret Thornton Foundation will continue this work long after I'm gone, ensuring that my response to family betrayal creates positive consequences that will protect elderly people's rights and autonomy for generations to come. That's a legacy worth fighting for, and a victory that proves some battles are worth winning, not just for yourself, but for everyone who will benefit from the principles and protections you establish through your courage and expertise. Sometimes, changing the deed is just the beginning of changing the world. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.